Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're just a few weeks into the new year, and we're back with the first What School Could Be Big Think of 2025. I'm Mel Ching, the What School Could Be Global Knowledge Curator, and I'm being joined today by the host and producer of the What School Could Be podcast, my friend, colleague, and co-conspirator, Josh Rapoon. Hey, Josh.
Hey, Mel.
Well, we're here today to celebrate a very special 10th anniversary of the documentary Most Likely to Succeed. It's a film that's left an indelible mark on how we think about education. In fact, Josh, almost every educator I know who's seen the film can tell me where they were, who they were with, and maybe most importantly, how that film made them feel.
Yep.
Josh, you've been a part of Most Likely to Succeed since almost the very beginning, and you were the driving force behind all of the community screenings here in Hawaii, where we live. So I'm wondering, what was your light bulb moment around Most Likely to Succeed?
Oh boy, thank you, Mel. That's an awesome question. And that light bulb moment is as clear as day for me. It was like it happened yesterday. January 22nd, 2016, I and my brother John pulled together a screening at Key Project, which is a community center in our home town of Kahalu in Hawaii. And we had about 200 people, and we had them all seated in circles, and we showed the film. And there was this terrifying moment, Mel, at the very end of the film when I thought on a Friday night that everybody was going to get up and walk out and nobody would want to talk about it. And when the film ended and the lights came up, not a single person left. And for the next hour, the energy in the room, the discussions at each table were unbelievable. And it really changed the arc of my life. Those few minutes changed the arc of my life. So I remember it perfectly. And that's why I'm super stoked to be here today to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Most Likely to Succeed.
Oh my gosh. Well, we're going to bring this full circle for you, Josh. And I'm going to hand over the hosting duties to you while I step backstage to run everything back there. And I'm going to let you introduce the two visionaries behind the documentary Most Likely to Succeed.
That's awesome. Thank you, Mel. You rock. Okay, everybody. So, wow, I can't even believe this moment. We have Ted Dintersmith, the executive producer of Most Likely to Succeed, and we have Greg Whiteley, the director of Most Likely to Succeed. And the whole team at What School Could Be is so grateful to the two of you for spending this hour on a Saturday morning, or for you, a Saturday afternoon, with us to talk about 10 years after Most Likely to Succeed. So, Greg, I'm actually going to throw the first question to you. I'm trying to imagine the moment when this guy named Ted Dintersmith, this VC guy who claimed he was retired and said he was playing some golf, but not very good at it, and was looking into his kids' education, approached you and wanted to do a documentary about education. And I'm just betting my wallet you were like, man, you got to be out of your mind. So what was that moment? Tell us the story of how that happened.
First, he sent me a book called The Global Achievement Gap, Tony Wagner. Right. And I had two kids were in fourth grade. So sort of came to approach me a movie like for a major, and there's somebody with a clock that approaches you. It's always perfect time, even more perfect. I just had these kids. My wife and I would go to bed talking and anxiously worrying about education. It sort of lacked a direction of how we would influence it. What it felt like we were offering our kids up more into the education gods, and sort of were better they were around. I read Tony's book. I stuck to it after I met Ted. I really enthusiastic. Ted had this gift of not being passionate about a number of things.
So, hey, Greg, we're going to pause you for a second because we can't hear you very well. So give us a second to see. Maybe it might be best, Mel, if Greg drops out and comes back in again. It might be an internet connection. In the meantime, Ted and I can continue.
I have to say, this is the first time in my life that Greg Whiteley has not been incredibly articulate. Like, this is the first. 13 years in, and finally you don't make sense. It's all the internet's fault.
Greg, let's try it again. Greg, just say something. Yeah.
Better?
Yeah. No. It's,
again.
Yeah. Okay. So Ted, Greg sends you you send Greg the Global Achievement Gap, which was written by Tony Wagner. What were you thinking at that moment?
Well, I was relatively new to the field. I sort of went through this gradual transition with my own kids and was trying to think of what would be a good way to make an initial contribution, and came up with the idea of doing a film. I have to tell you that in the same week, 2 different people told me, you should call this guy Greg Whiteley. And Greg's not here. I can tell the story. I mean, he had a couple of early works that were fantastic, but weren't terribly, out there. He doesn't have this. I wish he were here for me to say. He doesn't have a room full of Emmys and awards. But I called him, and, it was just clear that this was a very special, amazing person. Greg, I'm bragging about you here. So
let me just log off. It's better when I'm not here.
Yeah, your audio.
We can hear. I was saying that in the same week, 2 people, when I was looking for somebody to work with on this film, 2 people said the person you should call is Greg Whiteley. And I call you, and I'm just was like blown away. I just say, like, what an honor and privilege it would be to work with this guy. And now we're like best friends for life. So we not only get a film out of this, but a great friendship. But we had a great initial conversation, and then went from there. And I think, well, Greg, you were kind of coming in and out, but the audio's back. So maybe turn it back to you with what you were saying about Global Achievement Gap, Tony's great book, and your own family situation with your kids.
Yeah, I think it was just having 2 kids that were 4th and 6th grade. My wife and I were going to bed at night, worrying, talking about what do we do. I mean, it really felt like we were offering our children up to the education gods every morning, and then anxiously waiting for them to come back and hoping that they were better when they left. And so I think I fit into a category of what I think most of our audience for the film has been, which is you're really worried about education. You probably know enough about education to be annoying, but not really enough to be effective in any way. And what should I be advocating for? And I think just out of insecurity, I would send my kids off to Kumon. I would try and make sure that they were getting all these mindless homework packets done on time. But all of that really sort of felt empty. And so meeting Ted, reading Tony's book, I was like the perfect audience for their pitch. And I think, Josh, you put it best. I felt like meeting those guys changed the course of my life. I got smarter every conversation I had with both of them. And it was Ted and I just hit it off immediately. But I started scratching my head because I can't think of a single human that doesn't hit it off with Ted Dintersmith.
My wife is listening.
Right.
She can name names.
So, okay, so we have a little something up our sleeve for you too. This is 2 minutes long. It's a video clip, and we'll talk about it after we show it to you. We're going to jump forward in time a long ways and come up to 10 years ago. So Mel's going to go ahead and play this clip.
All right, I am here with Most Likely to Succeed, and please introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about the movie.
I'm Erin Whiteley, producer.
Greg Whiteley, producer, director.
And I'm Ted Dintersmith, executive producer. And the film is all about the future of school in our country and the role it can play in either empowering our youth to do well or exposing them to real financial and personal vulnerability in an economy that's increasingly automated.
And it's a musical.
I hear they're big right now.
They're gonna come back.
All right, and what do you specialize in documentaries?
Yeah, so far that's what we've done. For the last 10 years, we've been making and producing documentaries, and we thought we were through with it. And then we met Ted, and through his charisma and charm and support, he's shepherded our last project that we're ever going to do in the documentary.
That's what he thinks.
No, I'm just kidding. We love making documentaries. We'll spend the rest of our lives making them, but it's only because of thanks to people like this.
All right, and what are you hoping for your film? Do you have a distributor already, or what are you hoping for the film this week?
We've come here in the old traditional way, in the Sundance spirit of seeking distribution. Nobody has seen this film until it premieres this Sunday at 2:30 p.m. And I think if we've done our job right, there'll be some people there with checkbooks, we hope, and we'll see what happens.
All right, and what's the one thing that you want audience members, besides the person with the checkbook, to take away from your movie?
Want to take a stab at that?
Sure, we're hoping they'll get excited by the possibilities of what their school could be going forward and to use the film and a whole set of complementary resources we're putting in place to help their school advance.
Ted used a phrase when he was first introducing this idea to our film team, and it was to create climate change in this country with regards to education. Do you agree with that? I think we believe there needs to be a titanic shift in how we view how kids should be educated.
All right, well, thank you very much for coming by KPCW, and good luck this Sundance.
Thanks.
So Ted, first of all, you're
How come Greg and Erin don't look any older today and I do?
That's not true.
Somebody's got to
How
explain that.
gray my hair is.
Ted, I can only imagine, given your investment up to that point, that just hours away from the screening at Sundance, there must have been a lot going through your mind. It must have been quite a moment. And it really sort of reflects on how you were looking in that moment. And maybe there was a little bit of stress, a little bit of excitement. What do you recall about that just a few hours before the screening?
Well, Greg has more Sundance experience than I do, but there's just a buzz and electricity around Park City with the festival. And so you are, first of all, getting a film in. And the reason that film's there is Greg Whiteley. It's so hard to get a film accepted at Sundance. It's like a 2-3% rate. And this type of film is not up their power alley. So a mere mortal would never have produced a film that Sundance would premiere. Greg is not a mere mortal. But you get there and you're like, you kind of go from, will anybody even come to the premiere, to you get there and you see not only is the auditorium full, but there's a waiting line. There are people outside hoping that somebody has to go to the bathroom and they can grab their seat. Yeah. Then the projector doesn't break or something. And then you hope that at the end, the audience is awake and excited. And, all those things happen. I mean, it was an explosion of energy and the crowd went wild. And it's just like, for me, it's one of the most, outside of, personal things with my wife and kids, it's one of the most exciting experiences I'll ever have. And I felt just so grateful to have worked with somebody who could pull. It's very difficult. Greg used to say, filming in a school is like watching paint dry. I mean, it is very difficult to tell a moving, emotional story around what happens in day-to-day life in school.
Yeah.
And dang it all, he did that, right? And the audience is in tears. And so I don't know, it's just like, and then, by the way, then there's Sundance has an enormous word of mouth engine. People get on the bus. What have you seen? What did you love? So we had, I think, 5 other screenings. They were the same. They were all capacity and then people outside. So,
Yeah.
it was reinforced we had something really special here.
Greg, I've made a couple of films, and I know very, very well that the moment of truth is when an audience sees it for the first time. And really, you can think you've made the greatest film ever, and if the audience doesn't react, then that's where the truth is. What was happening for you in that particular moment? The clip, you were just hours away, and what do you remember thinking about? You and your wife obviously were running through your minds how this was going to play out.
Yeah, I was nervous. I've had 2 other films in Sundance, and so I've been around Sundance enough to know not every film succeeds at that festival. And, you can get a dud of an audience, or you just might have a film that doesn't quite tickle their sensibility. And what made this one feel a little bit slightly higher stakes was I've got my wife and my daughter are in the film, and they're in the film in the first 5 minutes. And so I thought, well, I'm not just humiliating myself and letting Ted down, who I loved. And that's one of his other gifts, is you really just want to hit home runs for people like that.
Yeah.
But I thought I'm dragging my wife and my daughter right into the mud with me.
Right.
But it was, I'd screened it enough with pockets of people that I know and I trust, and I felt confident. I felt like, I think this is a good film. I think people are going to be moved by it. I was nervous, like, will people come to a documentary about education at Sundance? Because like Ted said, that's not your typical blockbuster at Sundance. That's not your typical buzzworthy film. But so we were over the moon in how it was received and where it went from there.
So the clock is ticking here. Now we've got a lot to cover. So I want to shift it in the direction of the decision to film at High Tech High. And Ted, you've been to my home state of Hawaii 13 times, and you and I have spent a lot of time in the car together, and you've spun a lot of stories about making Most Likely to Succeed. I would love for our audience to hear how the 2 of you came to the decision to film at High Tech High. And I know that there was some debate amongst the 2 of you and your teams about whether it was going to be filmed at a number of schools or just one school. And so tell us a little bit of the backstory about how you decided to film at High Tech High. Ted, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I'll start. When in that initial call, I sort of laid out to Greg, I said, I've got this great idea for a documentary, interview A, B, C, D, and E. It'll be a great documentary. And to his credit, and what I really admired is Greg said, politely, because that's the only way Greg really interacts with people, very gently, politely, but basically said that's a terrible idea. and he was right. He said, if you can't tell a story, and what he asked, what he suggested, and what I said, okay, bingo. He said, we used a fishing hole metaphor. He said, point me in the direction of some good fishing holes and trust me to catch the story that will make the audience lean in and love what they're hearing about. And in a lot of different ways, I'm so grateful, but there were 2 or 3 different things that came up along the way of filming where Greg really, I would sort of say, I don't think this is right. Greg would push back. And I look in retrospect, he was totally right. Like I wanted to show lots of different schools. And he said, if you don't know these characters by the end and feel like they're your best friends, you're not going to reach people emotionally. And that's what he did. And the other thing, while I'm on this flow, is I kind of was saying, like, don't we want to tell people how great this school is? I mean, aren't we kind of underplaying it? And Greg's point on that, which is proven to be totally correct, was we're going to show them the school and we're going to underplay it. We're going to say still too new, still too early. Who knows? Everybody's got to make up their own mind. He said, if we respect the audience's ability to make up their own mind and just show them what we saw, they will respect our respect of their own agency in this. And that was entirely true. I mean, how many times have we screened this film? Nobody has thrown tomatoes. Nobody said, how dare you do this? I think people were really appreciative of, here it is, what do you think? Instead of, here it is, you have to do it this way.
Wow. Greg, why go fishing at High Tech High? How did High Tech High even enter the picture? And we're showing a photo here of what High Tech High looks like.
It's described in Tony's book, and both Ted and Tony had listed it as the #1 fishing hole that we should go to. We did go to a number of different schools, and I'm really glad that we did, because it only affirmed that we were catching High Tech High at the right time. That was the right place to go for our purposes.
So, Greg, what was the approach like? And I know Larry Rosenstock must have been part of the conversation at this point. High Tech High was really, I think at this point, if I've got my facts right, it was just High Tech High, High Tech Middle at that point. I mean, subsequently, it's gone on to be, 14 or 15 schools. But how was the approach? How did they receive your pitch about filming there? And it was clearly not going to be a short filming process.
I honestly don't remember making a pitch. I think Tony and Ted called them, and then I met with Larry, but I was literally just meeting him on our first day of filming. I think the way it was told to me is, I think we were not the only people that had ever filmed there. And strangely, as part of their registration process, each kid signed a media release to be filmed by news organizations, other documentary films, etc. Just because I think Larry, being the visionary that he is, thought, we want this place to be documented. Of course, if there was a kid and there was a handful that did not want, they weren't comfortable being filmed, that was identified and that was perfectly fine. We learned to steer clear of them. But it was such a dream to show up on this campus. I've now made a living shooting on junior college campuses and high school campuses, and it is a pain in the butt. It is just so hard. The unnecessary bureaucratic hoops you got to jump through. High Tech High had none of that, and I think a lot of that had to do with Ted and Tony paving the way.
So, audience members,
can I just add, because I think one of the things, as you see in the film, and if you visited there, the space is very inviting and open. And Greg did this a lot, and I tagged along in some cases. In most schools, if you want to film in a classroom, you've got to knock on the door, open the door, bring in. It wasn't just Greg; it was a team come in with the boom mic and everything. And suddenly, the students and teachers are not doing what they normally do; they're doing what they would do in front of a camera. Whereas High Tech High, it was so in and out, free flowing. They just kind of did what they normally do, and I think it made for complete authenticity in that filming process.
So to the both of you, because for me, one of my favorite scenes in the entire film is Mark Aguirre and the kids getting themselves organized in his seminar room. How did that happen? How did that moment come about?
We were just fishing. We didn't know that that's what the lesson was going to be that day. We were just filming what he does, and that wasn't choreographed for us. We filmed a lot of days with Mark, and that just happened to be one as we were editing. There's a lot of great stuff that was shot with him and with other teachers that didn't even make the film. It just that happened to be a story. We met a particular person in that room, and then Mark, of course, is a force of personality that just became a scene that made it into the film.
And you do, in some ways, hard effort creates your own good luck. And so Greg and his team were there. If I'm not mistaken, that was the first day of class. And they got great footage of the wonderful Samantha, who ended up being a powerhouse figure in the film. But that's what I think made this film so special and very difficult for anybody else to ever come close to doing it, is they were able to catch Samantha that very first day of class. So you followed Samantha's journey, you followed Brian's journey, but you followed the teacher's journey as well. And, and it's like, boom, we just, and again, Greg and his team were all over this and just incredibly energetic. But to be there that first day and capture that very beginning, oh my gosh, it just bookended the film in a beautiful way.
And Greg, I'll share with you that my daughter and I were visiting High Tech High because she was interested in their graduate school of education. This is obviously many years later. And I spotted Mark in his classroom, and I was practically overcome. So I slipped in the back door. Emma and I slipped in the back door. And for the next like 40 minutes, he lectured to his class. And then after it was over, I introduced myself to him, and he got horribly embarrassed. He was like turned red, and he's like, I can't believe such a fan of the film was watching me lecture. This is terrible, you know. It was absolutely hilarious. So I wonder, before we go to our bottom of the hour break, if the two of you can share a little bit about the technical process of how long it took to film at High Tech High, and what was the coordination between the two of you? Greg, were you sending Ted clips? Ted, were you receiving, and were you just sort of out of the picture and Greg was fishing and then the stories were emerging? How did that work?
Honestly, I think the film is so good because I was out of the picture.
Oh, no, that's not true. We spent a good chunk of time that just visiting 5 or 6 different schools. And we even had plans to go to Norway. But when we found High Tech High, we really felt like that's where we needed to stop and drill deep. And we gave Ted a budget that would get us through a school year. And okay. I thought we'll film during the course of the school year, and by the end, and I've made 2 other films prior to this one, and I always come in at budget. And we got through that first year, and it just didn't feel like we'd had enough progress. Like Ted had mentioned, it was filming education. If you film a day, it's going to be a pretty dry day. And I could feel members of our film crew getting a little antsy. But I knew that if we just stuck it out, that's the beauty of film, is that you can condense time. And I knew we had a good story in Brian and Samantha. I just knew that these were, and I thought we had really great teachers. The teachers were interesting every day. But what's hard is to have a real film, you've got to have a character go on a journey where they become transformed. They become different. And we needed an extra year to do that. Ted, to his infinite credit, when we went back to him with hat in hand and we were sending him clips, he was enthusiastic enough, says, I totally understand it. I am in this. I'm in it to win it. What do you need? And that was the difference. I think had we had a different executive producer, I'd probably 9 out of 10 executive producers that I've worked with in the past, I could see them just saying, all right, no, I'm calling it. This is the budget. I agreed to that budget. Finish the film as best you can and have it go. And I think it would have been a fine movie. It wouldn't have been what you see now.
Ted, what are your recollections about that process as you started to receive some of the fish that were being fished out of the pond at High Tech High? What was that like?
Well, it was interesting because, we'd see clips. One thing and Greg was always incredibly, willing to go along with things I suggest. At one point I suggested including a lot more footage of Denver. That's a whole different story about all the time we spent in Denver, and we only used a little bit of it. But Greg's point was, I think you're going to be a lot happier with the film that really brings to life a few people instead of spreads itself out. And so Greg and his team put together a cut, which was time consuming. So I was responsible for running up the budget on that one for sure. But, they were just getting, well, first of all, oh my gosh, I mean, the cinematography is gorgeous. Right? I mean, it's just lush, right? I know we got the top of the hour. Greg, I'll tell you a funny story about Greg. Greg obsesses about the background for when he's interviewing somebody. He would say, like, I want to film Andy McAfee in the NASA space hangar. And I say, well, sure. And then he said, can you get me in? And that's where, I talked to Tony. We knew Nancy Conrad. Tony gets a lot of credit for a lot of things with this. We get that. Greg calls and says, well, I want to film Ken Jennings in the Seattle Public Library. Can you get me in? But it was like, I loved the push he brings to not just having somebody behind their desk, with a boring background, but it's just like, you just look, it's just visually stunning. And so when I see that, I just say like, oh my God, this is going to be a work of art. So how could you not be excited about it?
Ted, real quick, what is the location where you're filmed, that beautiful paneled room? Where is that?
We were at the College of William and Mary, mostly filming Robert Gates. Oh, I went to such lengths to get Robert Gates to agree to be filmed for our movie. I went to enormous lengths. and I said, Greg, can't you get Bob Gates in the film? But Greg said he kind of, he's not listening, I'm sure, brings it to a halt. There's something about his deliberate style that just absolutely interrupts the flow. Trust me on this. It won't work with Robert Gates in the film. And you're like, the beauty is, I mean, like, he's a guy you trust. So like, okay, Bob Gates, we go to great, former Secretary of Defense, get him to be interviewed, cutting room.
Well, I mean, in Bob Gates' defense, he was a perfectly fine interview. If you were asking him about aspects of national defense as it relates to education, he was great. It just wasn't the story that we ended up telling. We were so excited to get him. We were honored to meet him, and we filmed him, and it was a good interview. But it's like whittling wood. World-class whittlers, they'll tell you, you have to listen to the grain of the wood as you're carving it. And while we were editing it, just poor Robert Gates just ended up on the cutting room floor. But no fault of his own. It just High Tech High hijacked the movie.
Yep, got it. Okay, we're at the bottom of the hour. Listeners, we're going to share some information with you about what school could be. We have a program that we call Eye on Student Protagonism, where students present their projects in front of a virtual audience and get feedback and engage in conversation about those projects. This one is coming up on January 28th. The Green School in Bali, these are students who are going to talk about their capstone projects, and Benjamin Freud is going to bring them with him. And then we have also my What School Could Be podcast will be released tomorrow night. It's with the researcher John Hattie and his colleague Tony Frontier. And you'll find out how I got these two guys on the pod when you listen to the interview, coming out tomorrow night. And then we also have a film screening of the incredible film, and I know, Ted, how much you love this film, Rise, Voice of a New Generation, about One Stone Lab School in Boise, Idaho. This is a fantastic film. We're looking forward to showing it to you March 12th, and that's 7 p.m. Eastern. It's a 90-minute session, so we have a chance afterwards to have a discussion about the film, and One Stone students are actually going to join us for that. And then finally, we have the What School Could Be global online community. It's got about 4,000 educators and education leaders right now. It's a super vibrant and nurturing community. Join us at community.whatschoolcouldbe.org, or just go to whatschoolcouldbe.org and you'll see the button in the nav bar. So Greg and Ted, we have a little surprise for you. Mel's going to play a few seconds of a video clip, and then we'll go from there. Okay,
Hey,
Mel.
Ted. Hi, Greg. We're excited to be on a big thing soon in May and continue talking about all that High Tech High has done and continues to do for us.
Yeah, I hope you guys are doing well. It's been, I think, 10 years since we've seen each other in person. So we're a little different. I sound a little bit better, I think, not as high pitched. But I hope you guys are doing well. And yeah.
So the What School Could Be team had an incredible meeting with Samantha and Brian about a week ago, and they're actually going to be participants on Mel Ching's Big Think coming up in a month, where they're actually going to be just like you today. We're going to have a conversation with them about their lives. And Samantha, of course, Brian is becoming a filmmaker or is in the film industry, and Samantha is teaching at University of California, Santa Barbara, and is getting her PhD and is very interested in project-based learning. So we've got a whole journey emerging with her. So we thought that this would be a great clip to actually dive a little bit deeper, Greg, I'll start with you, in how the Samantha and Brian stories emerged. How did your team, just sort of see how these two rich storylines had potential? I think that's the part that's amazing, is you kind of have to see the potential, and then you have to position the cameras so that they're actually capturing it, but you don't actually know at that point, right, if the full potential is going to be reached. So I wonder, how did that play out for your team?
Yeah, I think in this style of filmmaking, I'd had some experience, and what I learned early on is trust your instincts. In the initial moment you begin filming, there's going to be a couple of people that pop for you. And I made the mistake on a previous film of sort of hedging my bets and not really quite trusting those instincts. And as a result, I ended up wasting time in areas I shouldn't have wasted. And so I was blessed with a really great team, some of which are people I still work with today. Adam Leibowitz, Adam Ridley. These are both people that produced and helped edit the film with me. And of course, my wife, Erin Whiteley. Gabe Pate was the cinematographer. When we first saw Brian, and then when we first saw Samantha, I think just right away, the best way you could put it is there's just kind of a star power to them. Now, there was a number of kids that were charismatic and had personalities that the camera would love, but it was only after getting to know them and talking to them a little bit that you could sense a sort of, they were on the cusp of something happening. They were on the cusp of, the best way I could put it, Josh, is you go to a party and you don't know anybody and you start meeting people, but by the end of the night, you realize you've talked to one or two people the majority of the time. You don't know why. You're just sort of, that's who you were attracted to. That's who you wanted to spend time with. And they wanted to spend time with you. That's an important part of it too. I mean, there's some people I've wanted to film and they did not want to be filmed. But both Brian and Samantha were down to clown. And we were interested in them. And we just trusted that. We just went hard on those two stories.
Ted, what is your recollection of the first moments when you started to hear from Greg and the team that Samantha and Brian were these two emerging storylines?
And this is a bit hazy for me, to be honest, because I feel like only in the editing process, and Greg could correct me, but there were a bunch of different students that were interesting. And so I saw a lot of footage of kids that made it in the film hardly at all or not at all. And, but it was pretty, two things were quite clear. They were incredibly charismatic. You just kind of fell in love with these kids. Remember, they're only like 15 years old at the time, a freshman year.
Right.
And it was, in many ways, you think about this film, it's almost as if you hired somebody to write a script. They wouldn't come up with something better. You have Samantha that first day in the class with her, she's feeling very shy and there's sort of this squeaky voice. And then it goes to and one of the anecdotes I think is really interesting is that at the end, when she pulls her team together when they're about to go put this play on, and she gives them that really kind of very assertive pep talk that says, you can do it. You're going to be great. You're going to nail it. Your parents are going to love you, blah, blah, blah. Her teachers weren't even aware that happened, right? Greg's there with his team and these other students. They're like watching the film saying, oh my God, we had no idea that happened. But it's like it built to that. It was incredible. And then with Brian, you sort of build. And then, of course, you're in suspense. Will he get it done? Won't he get it done? You're kind of expecting, if you've given this much attention, of course he's going to get it done by exhibition night. Right. And then it's like, kind of a bummer. He didn't. And then, of course, we've got this magic blow you away ending. I'll add one other thing, which I think the team did a really great job on, particularly in the case of Samantha, capturing the parents' perspective with those fabulous interviews with Samantha's mom.
Yeah.
Like when, I forget it, when are they going to memorize the capital of Lithuania or something like that? I mean, it was a very honest, but a very poignant way of capturing the trade-off parents feel. I mean, it's new, it's different. She's happy here. She's really motivated. She's developing as a person, but
Greg, that was actually where I was going to go next, is how did Lorena, who's Samantha's mother, and then the other parents who were in the film, how did that emerge for you and your team? How did they become fish in the pond that you started to hook and then pull into the storyline? It just boggles my mind, Greg. This is so complex. There are so many complex stories within the storylines that are emerging here. And I wonder, how did parents emerge as part of the overall picture?
I don't know that, Josh, it was anything conscious. I think the parents showed up to that, first day of school. And then, of course, they show up to exhibition night. We filmed a handful of parent-teacher conferences only because, well, this will be interesting. We should maybe film that. But I think maybe subconsciously, I was very interested in the story of the parents because I was asking a lot of the same questions. I was curious in the same way that they were curious. And so I think by virtue of that, it was a very natural thing to do, to include the parents, at least the ones that were willing to.
Greg, I want to ask you about one scene in particular, which is the one that you shot in Lorena's car with Samantha sitting in the back seat. How did that scene actually happen?
It really was a function of just putting in time. I mean, as soon as you identify a couple of characters, and I think it's the reason why you want to keep the number of characters you're focusing on limited, because if you don't and you're spreading yourself too thin, you'll miss that moment. You won't be in the backseat of that car because you're filming somebody else. And so the moment you've identified somebody, you just wear them out. You're just going to hang out and film and be with them. And a story starts to emerge. And when the story emerges, you need to have lots of different elements of their life that are documented, because that's how life is. If all we did was film classroom stuff, well, you'd only get a small slice of what Samantha's story is. You'd be missing that dynamic with her mom, and you'd be missing the mom's conversion, which is just as dramatic as Samantha's. To watch the mom see her daughter transform, and it's not anything you can necessarily predict, but you just know, if you go through your paces as a documentary filmmaker and put yourself, work hard, be active in fishing, you get a little lucky, you're going to get moments like that.
So Ted, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, you've shared with me in the car the many times you've been here in Hawaii, the story of maybe a little bit more depth in the story of Brian's team not meeting the public exhibition deadline. And that I believe, Ted, that you've described to me that there were text messages going back and forth between you and Greg, and that the thing was happening in real time. What was that? What was going on there?
Well, normally I wasn't very involved in what was going on any given shoot, but exhibition night, I was very curious. And so I'm trading texts all day with Greg and with the two Adams. And I'm thinking that if we, Brian's got to pull this off, right? I mean, if it's a downer in this film if we get to exhibition night and Brian doesn't pull it off. And I get this one text, it's like, 12 hours to go, not obvious he'll finish, 8 hours to go, not looking that good, 4 hours to go, still a lot of ground to cover, not sure he'll get, it's like, and boom, boom, boom. And it's time to go live with this. And he did not finish. And I'm like, I just think I said to my wife, oh my gosh, how will this work? And we're going to have to end the film on such a downer note. Darn, it's like it's sort of like the parent in me. Like, why don't you guys get in there and help him finish? And instead it was brilliant because they showed the kid, ambitious, thinking out as big and bold as he can, and he can't pull it off. And you're drawn into the suspense. And I think had that been the way it all resolved, it still would have been a fantastic film. And then, to Brian's credit, but also to Greg and his team's credit, that's not how it ended, as we know. And it just was like this absolute exclamation point to the film that says when students have agency, when you give them the chance to run at something big, and when they fail, you don't say you are a total loser, that's an F. You say, wow, what'd you learn from this? Which we saw. These kids just are not going to give up, right? They want, it meant something to Brian, and you saw that. He just kept coming back. But bragging about the film team, they didn't give up either. They kept coming back. It's like, and so like when they pulled that off, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm in the presence of greatness, like, and it was like a storybook ending. And as I say, it's like if Hollywood script writers put their mind to a film about education, they wouldn't beat what happened. And this was real.
Well,
Greg,
what Ted's not telling you is it took more money to go back and film Brian finishing the thing that he didn't finish. And Ted's patience and support, I'm just telling you, I've worked with other investors and other studio executives. They say, hey, here's your deadline, hand it in, do the best you can. And I think it would have been an okay film, but how great was it? To me, that what I always think back on is watching Brian's teacher come in on a holiday weekend.
Yeah.
And I mean, that guy could have finished Brian's piece in about half an hour and saved himself all kinds of time. But he was totally committed to this type of education. Like, this is yours, Brian. All right. If you're going to show up on the weekend, I could do that too. To me, it's indicative of both the virtue and the vice of this pedagogy, if you could even call it a pedagogy. But it requires teachers willing to truly go to the mat time and time again. And I saw it. When I finished filming, I was so excited. I moved to San Diego so that my kids could go to that school in hopes that they could go to that school. And I watched the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it is so hard. I mean, you'll talk to people. High Tech High did not, I don't know where they are today, but they did not stay High Tech High. Right. And it was largely because it's just so hard. It requires teachers that are absolutely dedicated. And I mean, if I could, I think that the next thing I'd like to accomplish is somehow just give them all billions of dollars so that they're spending their weekends on holiday weekends so that the Brians of the world have that feeling of finally finishing the thing that they were meant to finish.
Right. Okay, our time is ticking down. I have to go. I have to go here because it's been such a crazy ride for me. You guys had to have had a conversation. And again, our show today is a family rated show, right? But you two must have had a conversation about the two BSs at the beginning of the film. And our audience wants to know, how did the BSs happen? Like, and by the way, for everybody who's watching, this is Scout. This is Greg's daughter. And that actually caught me by surprise when I found that out. So Greg, Ted, how did the BSs happen? Because they are a major part of this film.
Are there two? I forgot there's two.
There's two. Yes. Oh. Yeah.
Well, I'm church people, so I try and watch my language, but I just knew making a movie about education, you're going to have an audience sit down either at home or in a movie theater. They're going to start watching this show, and you've got about, I think, 3.5, 4 minutes to demonstrate two things. One, this is something that's going to be thought-provoking. You're going to leave this film a better person. You're going to be more, quote unquote, educated. But two, it's going to be fun. And I don't know, but Ted and I tried about 50 different words, and that was I just laid it down in a voiceover because it was just how I felt. And then as I tried to, I go, well, of course we won't do that because it's a family show. I got to get rid of that word. And so I would try all kinds of different words. And Ted is the reason why that word remained. You just said, I'm sorry, there's no other word that will work. You keep trying these other words. And I mean, Ted, am I remembering that correctly?
Pretty close, but there is a different version that we did that had it swapped out "this is beep" for "this is a joke," right?
Yes.
And one of the things Greg said, and this was not just about this specific scene, but it was about the entire film. And when he first said this to me, I said to myself, well, this is BS, which Greg said, you can change something small one place in a film, and it will change the entire way the audience watches the rest of the film.
Yeah.
And I said, like, Greg, like, are you nuts, right? I mean, like, you're telling me that if you change 15 seconds, that it has an effect a half an hour to an hour later? I mean, like, I'm not buying that. But, I've been in those screenings where the film says this is a joke, and the energy level in the audience is demonstrably different. And I think that Greg, and this was, I mean, for some people, this would have been like, oh, what the heck, I'm using this word, right? I know that Greg agonized about this. But I think that at the end, he basically said, I want to make sure people realize this isn't just another boring film about education. I want to set a tone that says what we're doing is so wrong that it warrants some degree of outrage. And I think most people, when they, over the course of the film, they get a sense of this isn't a flamethrower guy, Greg. He's a very thoughtful, deliberate, this wasn't an easy word for him to say, but I felt like it did sort of set a tone for this that sort of just locks audiences in. They just say like, wow, because I do think that's what a lot of parents and a lot of kids are, like in the back of their mind, they're saying, whoa, this is bullshit.
Okay, I got one more technical question. And again, we just only have a couple minutes left. Greg, I would bet that if you polled everybody who's ever watched Most Likely to Succeed over the last 10 years, they would say that the music at the end of the film gets them choked up every single time. It does for me. I've seen the film, good Lord, 50 times. Every time it's the same reaction, like I'm seeing it for the first time. How did your team choose that music? That was genius, that particular.
Yeah, all credit goes to Adam Leibowitz and Adam Ridley for that particular choice. There were several pieces of music that were tried there, and that was just the winner.
That's awesome.
I'm glad you pointed that out, because I feel like it strikes the sort of perfect balance between being interesting and complex, but also heartfelt.
I think, go ahead, Ted.
Well, I was going to add, it's the music, but also I want to, Tony was incredibly helpful, but we need to give some recognition to Sir Ken Robinson on this film. And, yes. Greg loved the backgrounds. He was filmed in the library at UCLA. Ken, we know, passed away, and a huge loss for the world. But, Ken was game for everything. So he doesn't walk. He didn't walk that easily. He has to go downstairs. They do this great. What you interviewed him for 30 minutes, right? But he just nailed it. And that stretch at the end with the music, with Brian, but with Sir Ken teeing it up, it is so choice. And, I just look at that. And then the other thing I want to give a shout out to, which I think it's worth emphasizing here, is that I love the opening, the first 15 minutes to tee it up. And we did this film, right, it was in the can, sort of 10 and a half years ago, 11 years, this is fairly in the world of technology. This is a long time ago. And this film exactly anticipated what's going on with artificial intelligence. I mean, you build from, computers beating the world's best chess player to computers beating Ken Jennings, which was brilliant, to computers, computers writing better than world-class journalists. It's like, whoa, this was done, premiered 10 years ago, done 11 years ago. And we just we were so ahead of our time. And the last thing I'll say, and this is another shout out to Greg, there was we got a lot of encouragement and actually push. Back in 2015, Common Core was front and center. There's a lot of discussion about Common Core, the tail end of the Obama administration. And Greg said, I don't want to do anything about Common Core. If we do something in Common Core, that's going to come and go. We're going to date this film. We want to do a film that's timeless. And the only thing that could potentially date the film was technology, except we've nailed that. And this entire film, people who watched it today, I think they would agree. This is every bit as relevant today, maybe even more relevant today than it was in 2015 when it premiered.
Okay, so a couple more things here. To the both of you, I can only imagine, let's come back to Sundance, and the film has been screened and the reaction and the energy in the theater and all of that. I can imagine that in the hours afterwards, that must have been pretty incredible, that you realized that you'd hit a home run. And Ted, you were about to make some decisions at that point about the community screening model that you decided to go with. And Greg, as a filmmaker, it must have been quite a moment to realize that you'd hit a winner, and actually in a field, education, that is very difficult to change. And this was going to generate conversations for many years to come. So Ted, I wonder if you can go first, just briefly, like, what was that like in terms of the decision-making right after the film debuted, and how you charted a course forward towards getting it out to communities, 10,000 screenings over the next couple of years all across the United States?
Yeah, well, we got a couple of offers. Honestly, my goal was never to have this be one tile on a screen that somebody might happen to see. And again, sort of credit to Greg and his team. For the film team, I think a better outcome would have been, hey, film acquired by company X or company Y. And I sort of said, like, would you work with me on a community screening model? Because I feel like the power of the film is bringing school communities together for thoughtful discussion. And to their credit, they were very supportive. And so we turned down those offers. And as you say, have done 10,000 community screenings. And a shout out, by the way, one of the great things about this film for me is it led me to you, Josh. Which then led me to Mel. So that was fantastic. The other thing, and I got it in my background, but we had a big team out there. We brought a lot of the people from High Tech High and Greg's film team, and Tony was there, Stephanie Rogan was there. We had a great, it was real. I was like, well, after that screening, when the crowd went wild, the group of us, we just had, Larry was there, it was like, oh my gosh, it was so much fun. That was like a great day, oh my gosh, just a great day.
Greg, what was it like for you in the hours afterwards, after the screening?
I wish everybody, whether you're a filmmaker or not, could have that feeling. Sundance is so fun. And you're sleep deprived, you're oxygen deprived, and you're kind of like floating from one event to the next. Sundance also does this trick on you where they make you feel like you're the center of the whole universe, because you go from your screening to press junkets to another that's all about you, asking questions about what, and then to another one of your screenings. And it's very heady and very fun. I kind of felt like once we received an offer or two for distribution, whether or not Ted was going to accept them or not, I sort of felt like, well, we could just have fun. And it was just everybody I wish could have that experience. It's a blast. It's a week that is well spent.
That's awesome. And we want everybody to know that Last Chance U is Greg's also a series of films that were shot on campuses. Those are well worth watching. Ted and Greg, this is Beth Blankenship and Annie Evans a couple of hours ago. They screened Most Likely to Succeed. They took a group photo. And also a little bit earlier, apparently, Ted, they found your yearbook from 1970.
It's my old high school.
This is your old high school, and they have this question. We found your old high school yearbook, and we wonder what advice Ted in 2025 would give to Ted in 1970.
That was easy. Do not give a controversial graduation speech that causes people in your community to hate your parents for 30 years.
Yeah.
There we go.
There you go. There you go.
By the way, you can look up a copy of that speech. Does that exist online somewhere?
Thankfully not. That's the only thing that saved my whole reputation, is that was before anything could be recorded.
But Ted, I do recall that you went back last June and you gave the commencement at Madison again, correct?
I did, and it was nice that nobody booed this time. I'm not kidding. When I gave as a student speaker in 1970, there were boos in the, I mean, not just one or two. It's like most of the audience was booing me. It was like, I think it was the start of my battles with the conventional education model they got going in 1970.
So Ted, that's perfect. We're going a couple of minutes over time, but we're going to do it. I'm going to give you the last word, Ted, before we put a couple graphics up on screen. I would love for you to just sort of in a nutshell explain why you think Most Likely to Succeed is so timeless. Everybody calls it that. It's a timeless film. And what do you think is the essence of the film that makes it timeless?
Well, two things. One, I'm really proud of, and one I regret. So what I'm proud of is it's just a brilliant film. I mean, just as a film, it tells an incredible story beautifully. You know, I think it's and Greg avoided anything to sort of lock it into a very specific period. I mean, the second reason it's timeless, right, is that it still doesn't take place very many. You know, we made that film 10 years ago. I thought, man, a lot of people will see this film and in 10 years, almost every school will be different. You know, what makes it unfortunately timeless, right, is that schools are still basically doing what they were doing in 2015 and 2005 and 1970 and 1923. And, you know, it's like, you know, and that's the painful part about this, right, is that the urgency, which I think we've done a brilliant job of I mean, like right at the beginning, we just say, you know, this is important. The traditional model is falling apart, and it has only gotten worse in 10 years. Technology's gotten way better. So, you know, that part, I hope, you know, that if we did a 20-year look back, we say, you know, like, absolutely, schools got their act together. They've really made progress there. You know, and I'm not, you know, I've written a book about bright spots, you know, and Beth and Annie are bright, you know, there are bright spots. I don't want to, you know, Hawaii has there are plenty of bright spots. It's still sort of seems like a 1% to 2% thing. And a 98 to 99% of kids are still going to sort of this industrial era model that Tom Friedman in the film sort of lays out. It's, you know, so let's hope that part sort of, we make progress in the next 10 years that I don't think we've made a whole lot of progress on in the last 10.
And Greg, I'll just actually change my mind and give you the last thought. I wonder what it feels like to know that 10 years after you made a film, there's still a tremendous amount of energy around it. We at What School Could Be, we're organizing screenings that are going to be happening over the next few months to celebrate the 10th anniversary. There's still a lot of people out there that haven't seen it, and the reactions are still the same. What does that feel like to know that you've made something timeless that's going to continue to have an impact, small, medium, or large, for years to come?
I didn't know that was happening. I'm really,
it is.
It's heartening. Yeah, I think the nature of my work, it feels like you're just a shark. You just have to keep eating. And okay, that was one meal. Now I got to, where's the next one? So to have this hour to sort of to revisit this, it's incredibly meaningful. It's fun to think and look back, and I saw my daughter there in 4th grade. She's now in college studying forensic science, and I can see all the ways in which, if I knew then what I know now, I'd be very different in how I parent. I would have been very different as a student. And it causes me to feel that same ache I felt back when I was making this with Ted. Like, if we could just get people to learn what we learned in the making of that movie, I think the world would be a much better place. And I'm just so heartened, Josh, that there are people like you that are continuing to beat the drums, and that this film is a small piece of all that effort.
I give all the credit. We've got a small but mighty team at What School Could Be. And Greg, we're beating that drum as hard as we can right now. That's absolutely amazing. We do have a graphic that we want to show you here. We are giving you the opportunity, if you want to do a community screening, just whip out your mobile device and scan it to this QR code with your camera. And the What School Could Be team is more than happy to assist you in that. You can go to info@whatschoolcouldbe.org if you have any questions. And wow, Ted and Greg, thank you. This has been so much fun. We have recorded this session. We're going to put it out across social media so people can watch it after the fact. We're super grateful that Beth and Annie did the screening this morning. They're all here in the chat, and switching over, having a piece of cake and switching over to this conversation is absolutely fantastic. So the thanks to you both. And 20 years, 10 more years from now, we'll come back and look at 20 years after the fact, because we're just going to keep beating this drum, Greg. Absolutely. Thank you both.
Awesome. Thank you. Great job, Josh.